Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter and author, and I'd like to welcome you once again to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be traveling to India, New Delhi, Varanasi, Ayurveda retreat, Alleppey, Varkala, Kovalum and Mumbai. 9th of January 2019. It was difficult this year deciding where to go on our annual travels, but it seemed natural that after enjoying India so much last year, we should return, as there was so much more to see. Standing in the check-in queue at Gatwick, it occurred to me how on earth we survived before they started putting wheels on suitcases. My suitcase had a double wheel on all four corners, so I could wheel it along vertically with virtually no effort. How did we carry two 23-kilo suitcases without wheels? I read that there were now suitcases with GPS tracking, so I was sure it wouldn't be long before suitcases were motorized and would follow our phones without needing to be pushed. We could even pay for extras like a voice that tells people to bugger off when they get in your way. At check-in, disaster struck when we were told we couldn't fly unless we could show them a valid visa. I had visas, but hadn't printed them out because all I was given was an approval of the visa and not a printable document. I assumed, like the year before, it was all on their computer, and so we didn't need them. Without explanation, the man disappeared, and after 20 minutes, we were starting to get concerned when he appeared with a printout of our visas. Apparently, I should have followed a non-existent link in the confirmation email. We decided to fly with Emirates, and as we took our seats, it hit me how much better they were than British Airways. We flew with British Airways the year before, and apart from the video screens not much bigger than a mobile phone, mine was so knackered that I took a photo of it and complained in the hope I would get a free flight or at least an upgrade to first class. One can always dream. They replied with a short message and a few air miles. The screen on the Emirates plane filled the back of the seat in front and was full of options that make long-haul flying far more bearable. The only problem with Emirates was that it didn't matter where the destination was. You nearly always had to change planes in Dubai. The relative time in Dubai for us was 4 a.m., so it was very hard going, but we were soon back on a plane and landing in New Delhi late afternoon. It was amazing how empty the border control was for those like us who had electronic visas. Our taxi driver had trouble finding our hotel as he didn't seem to have the hang of GPS. At one point, we turned off a roundabout onto a long straight road. Knowing that we were going in the wrong direction, instead of resigning himself to going to the end of the road and returning, he reversed back into the roundabout against the horrendous traffic with everything honking at him. He persevered, and after finding a safe haven, he called the hotel manager to come and rescue us. We were shattered, but we wanted to delay going to sleep until as late as possible so we could adjust to the time difference. It was no problem for me, as unlike Federika, I had no problem sleeping on planes. Federika was not only suffering from sleep deprivation, but she also had a cold. Our hotel was pleasant enough, but the area around it was very run down. The owner warned us against going out at night because of stray dogs. It seemed like a weird warning, but we were happy to stay in our room, and the owner ordered a pizza for us, which really hit the spot. There was plenty of time for traditional Indian food. One strange thing was that despite it being quite cool, our bed only had a bottom sheet. When I asked for a top sheet, I was told it was in the cupboard, and if we wanted it, we had to do it ourselves. It was not a big deal, but I couldn't ever remember being told to make my own bed when entering a hotel room on the first day. Next morning, we took a walk to the local hotspot, Connaught Place. It was a pleasant walk, except for the constant hassling of tuk-tuk drivers demanding to take us somewhere. Connaught Place didn't look very welcoming, and a few people told us it wasn't safe in that area, so we should go to the shopping mall instead. We ignored them as we didn't feel at all threatened. Someone told us there was no police patrolling in that area and insisted we go to the tourist office for a map, which did seem a good idea. We followed him, and it turned out to be a standard tour agency that I expect would have given him a commission. By that time, our defences were worn down, and we agreed to book a driver for a tour that afternoon. First stop on the tour was a Sikh temple, which seemed to differ from the numerous other temples we have been to in that, apart from our shoes, we also had to take off our socks. We had to wade through a little moat to get to the entrance of the temple. The temperature was quite cold, so I found walking on bare feet on the stone floors quite uncomfortable. Inside the temple, the tiled floor was heated, which was a relief. When we were last in New Delhi, we wanted to go to the highly recommended water and light show at Akshardham, but it was closed on the only day we could visit. Although we were not too keen on New Delhi, we decided to stay an extra day so we could visit the show. It was a large temple with lots of things to see before the light show at night. It was very busy and easy to see when the show was about to start, as a great crowd of people started making their way to the projection area. The show was amazing. In the centre was a pool with spectacular effects as water spouts shot up in different patterns with lights changing colour constantly. At times, the water looked like it was on fire while scenes were projected onto the wall of a large building, and a voice told the bloody history of the temple. At one point, the building burst into flames and collapsed, only to be rebuilt a few minutes later. It was a great night and well worth the extra day in New Delhi. The drive from the airport to Varanasi was uneventful until we reached the outskirts, when all hell broke loose. It was a 2-lane road with solid traffic. Drivers of every single vehicle were sounding their horns non-stop, and mopeds kept cutting in front of us, so our driver was constantly hitting the brakes. It took an hour to go just a few miles, and it wasn't until we got to the hotel that Federika told me she had been on the verge of suggesting we abandon Varanasi and go back to the airport. I would have agreed, as apart from the journey being so bad, it didn't look like a very nice place anyway. I realized later that it was more that we hadn't adjusted to India yet. Once inside our hotel room with its relative peace, everything seemed much brighter, which was ironic because our room was quite dark. It was a lovely little boutique hotel called Granny's Inn, rated very highly on Booking.com, probably because it was incredibly cheap and was owned by a real-life granny. It was a family-run hotel, and every morning everyone sat around a large table and ate a breakfast prepared by Granny herself. At the head of the table was her son, who had had a stroke at a very young age, which had left him disabled. He was very keen to communicate with everyone, but it wasn't easy, as he kept repeating the same questions, so it made answering a little pointless. It was a lovely family who took a lot of pride in their hotel, which was beautifully decorated and had little ornaments in every corner. We had a giant padlock on our door like the kind you would use in a castle, so there was certainly no chance of taking that home by mistake. After lunch and my customary 20-minute siesta, we took a casual stroll down to the Ganges River, where we had arranged to meet someone for our sunset boat tour, something we were both looking forward to. Walking towards the river, it was hard to believe possible, but the road got even more congested due to there being no pavements, and pedestrians were mixed up with the traffic. We walked shoulder to shoulder with other pedestrians as every conceivable form of transport tried to push past us. On 2 occasions, the strap of my rucksack got caught up in a passing rickshaw, so I had to run alongside it until I got untangled. There were 2 narrow lanes on either side of the road, with a barrier in between. It got worse when everything merged into one lane because a cow was lying on the road, leaning up against the barrier. It was oblivious to its surroundings and just lay there, casually chewing the cud like it was sitting in a field in the countryside. The final 100 meters before reaching the river was a solid line of women sitting on the floor, begging with children on their laps. Our first sight of the mighty Ganges River was breathtaking. There was a large area where people were putting out hundreds of chairs in preparation for the famous Ganges Aarti ceremony, a religious and spiritual ceremony performed every night by the river's edge. We met our guide, and he walked us to a long boat with the man who would row us. We rowed slowly upstream while the guide gave us an excellent commentary explaining everything there was to know about the Ganges. After the noise and chaos of the roads, the river was surreal with a mist and a chill in the air. The river must have been very cold, but there were still lots of people washing themselves in the water by the edge. Some areas were used as commercial laundries, with dozens of men and women standing in the river, smashing clothes and sheets against rocks. Hung up against the buildings was a sea of sheets hanging out to dry, although heaven knows how that would happen when there was no wind or sun. We turned and rowed downstream, going past where we saw lots of small fires with people gathered on the banks of the river. This was Varanasi's biggest claim to fame, the place where Hindus hoped to die and be cremated. The alternative was to die somewhere else and run the risk of being born again. In the past, bodies were put on rafts and cremated on the river, but I expect health and safety had something to say about that and insisted it was done on funeral pyres by the river's edge, with the remaining bones taken somewhere else. Despite the strict laws, it was not uncommon to see bodies floating past, although thankfully we didn't see any. The guide explained the complicated protocol involving families before and during a cremation ceremony. What surprised me was that the whole area was bustling, and there was none of the somberness usually associated with funerals. At the end of our tour, we joined hundreds of other boats that had gathered at the river's edge in front of the impending Aarti ceremony. All the boats were packed together so you could easily walk from boat to boat to get to land. In front of us was a line of monks performing the ceremony, ringing a small bell with one hand and waving around some kind of smoking churn in the other, while loud Indian music was playing. It was magical, and a great start to our holiday. We stayed a while at the ceremony and then walked along the small roads that ran parallel to the river, where huge piles of logs were piled up everywhere. We were reaching a crossroad in the path when there was some commotion, and suddenly a crowd of men rushed past us, carrying a body-shaped package wrapped in cloth. Down by the river, they placed it on a pile of logs, and preparations started on the cremation. It sounds pretty grim, but followers of the Parsi religion put their dead bodies on the top of a tower for the vultures and crows to come along and eat. The government were trying to put a stop to it because there was a shortage of vultures, so when the remaining birds were full up, they tended to drop bits of their dinner around the place.
When tiny feet are playing, the coldest heart shall warm. With future shining in their eyes, a better world is born. The fields of France are resting, the sleep that never ends. Near monuments to avarice lie rows of fallen friends.
Next morning we had to get up at 4:30 for our sunrise boat tour. Getting up at that time was not my idea of a holiday activity, but watch the sunrise over the Ganges sounded too exotic to miss. We had been instructed to get a rickshaw from our hotel to the area where the sunrise ceremony would be held. It was really cold when we left the hotel, but we had prepared ourselves with warm clothing. Despite the unsociable hour, it took about 5 seconds to find a rickshaw, and the man started pulling us along on foot. I had mixed feelings about this poor sod earning a few pence pulling us along the cold streets at 5 a.m. The humanitarian half of me felt guilty, but the Roman half gave me the urge to take out a whip and make him go faster. It was still very dark and quiet when we turned into an area that looked like we were entering hell. I had seen plenty of people living on the streets in different countries, but nothing like that. Whole families were sitting on pavements with no shelter, and children with bare feet and skimpy clothes, while I was struggling to keep warm with 4 layers of clothing. Mothers were feeding their children and going about their everyday lives as if it were a normal way to live. We met our guide at the arranged place, and he took us to where a man welcomed us onto his boat. It was still dark and cold, but mystical as we again made our way slowly up the river. We waited patiently for the magnificent sunrise, which was definitely there somewhere, behind the thick cloud and mist. I later discovered that at that time of year, the sun was always obscured by clouds, so it was a bit cheeky to be selling tickets for what they knew would be a no-show. At the end of the boat ride, there was another ceremony like the night before, but much lower key. We had booked 4 tours from the same reputable company in Varanasi, and while we were happy with the guide the day before, our guide for that morning was much better. He had his own show on the radio, and during the tour he told us many entertaining stories. We sat in a courtyard having our morning coffee while he told us a wonderful story about a man giving logical reasons to his king for why his life should be spared, despite him robbing someone. I would have happily paid our guide just to sit and listen to his stories. He showed us around various other buildings, and in one small area, wrestlers were training. They were going to do some wrestling, which I would have loved to see, but after watching them warm up for half an hour, I gave up. We spent the rest of the day relaxing, and in the evening met our guide again for a short tour. There was another ceremony, which included 7 monks waving what looked like small metal Christmas trees while a woman sang. There was a completely different atmosphere to the big sound of the main ceremony the night before, but it was still very moving. At the end of the ceremony, a group of 5 Indian women sang a cappella on a stage, while a large group of people sat around a fire, praying and throwing rose petals onto the fire. Federika was always ready to join in whatever was going on, and as soon as she sat down with them, someone offered her some petals to throw into the fire. There was such a feeling of peace and kindness, and a welcome for anyone who wanted to share their ceremony with them, regardless of their race or religion. The next day, we had another tour with our storytelling guide, this time to the Sana Buddhist temple. It was famous for being the place where Buddha gave his first sermon after achieving enlightenment. My mind often wandered when we went on tours, particularly when the guide went into great detail, but this guide turned everything into a story, and I was spellbound. Varanasi was the craziest, noisiest, and dirtiest place we had ever been to, but we loved it. It was hard to believe that a few years earlier the dirt was much worse, and so bad that they passed laws to clean it up. Heaven knows what it was like before. Our next flight was to Kerala, with a short stopover in New Delhi. We had an hour to transfer, which should have been enough, but at Delhi airport arrivals there was not a single direction to our departure gate, so we found ourselves in the international terminal instead of domestic. It meant we were back in a long queue for passport control, so we were certain to miss our connection. We pleaded with the man at the gate, saying there was no point in going through passport control for a domestic flight, but he was not interested. We had no choice but to push our way through the line, shouting, "We are going to miss our flight," and although there were a few grumpy people, we managed to get through with minutes to spare. I hated it when people did that, as most of the time they simply didn't leave home on time, but in our case, it really wasn't our fault. For our next adventure, we were booked for a week at Albin's Glory, an Ayurveda retreat on the outskirts of Kochi. It was highly recommended by someone we knew who went there nearly every year. The only thing that worried me was that it was too cheap. An all-inclusive package which included accommodation, 3 meals a day, a daily consultation with the Ayurveda doctor and a 1-hour massage, all for £400 for both of us. I wasn't expecting much, but although our room was simple, it was perfectly acceptable, and we had our own bathroom, which for me was essential. The grounds were beautiful and backed onto a wide river, so we would sit on sunbeds and watch the occasional fishing boat pass silently by. It was so peaceful, and what a relief after Varanasi. At lunchtime, we all sat at a large table in the garden, where they brought the food out to us. The menu for the week was strictly vegan, with no tea or coffee, and of course, no alcohol. Federika had warned me, so I was prepared and thought it would be good to eat healthily for a week. I knew I wouldn't be too keen on vegan food, but felt sure there would be plenty of things that would be acceptable. I was wrong. I was not a fussy eater, and the only things I couldn't eat were horseradish and anything with cloves in it, but now I could add anything vegan to that list. I didn't like most of what they served, but I managed to get through most of it. There was a particular spice which I really hated, and the problem was that I was never able to establish what that spice was. On the days they used that spice, I ate virtually nothing, but I still enjoyed my stay there. Federika liked most of what was served, and the other guests kept banging on about how good the food was. We got chatting to the other guests, who all had their own stories to tell. Some had been going for years and said how much the treatment had helped them. There was a nurse who had broken a thermometer and ended up with mercury poisoning, which affected her health very badly. They were a very friendly bunch, and during meal times they talked about who was having what treatment that day, and that's when I started to worry. One woman was missing from the table because she had just had her cleansing treatment and was feeling so bad that she couldn't get out of bed. That apparently was quite normal, and some of the guests talked of their experience with other treatments, and it all sounded horrific. The cleansing treatment required the patient to drink ghee mixed with cow's piss. I was prepared to go along with anything, but would draw the line when it came to taking something that would make me ill, especially when there was nothing wrong with me in the first place. Next morning we woke up to a shared breakfast of dry toast and warm water. It was my morning coffee that I missed the most. The sun was shining and the weather was pleasantly warm, so we took a stroll to the local village. There was not much there, not even a cafe where we could have a clandestine coffee. All the guests of the retreat had appointments at different times during the day, and ours was late morning. A tuk-tuk driver picked us up and took us on the 15-minute ride to the house of the Ayurveda doctor who was running the show. The road was terrible. In a car, it would have been uncomfortable, but in an old tuk-tuk, it was hard going as he was swerving around trying to miss the potholes. We were shown to the doctor's house and sat in a waiting room where we had to fill in forms with our names, ages, medical conditions, etc. We waited in turn to see the doctor who examined us and prescribed a treatment for the week. I was shown into a small office where Dr. Subhash was waiting for me. He was a quiet-spoken and kindly-looking man who looked at my questionnaire and asked me about myself and what my medical problem was. It wasn't until then that I realized how I had taken my good health for granted, as I couldn't think of a single thing wrong with me. He asked why I was there then, and I told him because my wife wanted to come, but I was still happy to go along with it and was sure a week in his hands would do me a lot of good. I was going to tell him there was no way I was going to be drinking cow's piss, but he never mentioned it, and I found out later that it was only certain conditions that he prescribed it for. He asked me about my dietary habits, and when I told him I had a sweet tooth, he said it was okay, but sweet things should be eaten at the beginning of a meal and not at the end, like us weird Westerners do. I was surprised and nodded my head, but I was sure he knew that was never going to happen. I went back to the waiting room, and shortly afterwards I was shown into a room where 2 men were waiting to give me a massage. I stripped down to my underpants and lay on the massage table, and one of the men put some warm oil on me. I had heard from the other guests that it was the doctor who prescribed what kind of oil would be used. In my case, the oil had a strong smell of onions. It wasn't my imagination, because another woman said she had also been massaged with onion oil, so I don't know what it was about our demeanour that made the doctor think of onions. A masseur stood on either side of me, and after establishing that I preferred a vigorous massage, they got to work. It lasted an hour, and although I was sure it was very good, I was never that bothered about massages. I didn't dislike them, but I wouldn't go out of my way to have one. 1 hour was a bit long for me, and I could have done without the onions.
Crazy, tapping against the rhythm, trying to find a place to come in. Crazy, trying to find a question for an answer, find a place under your skin. Crazy, digging a hole for her to put her worries in, giving it as a gift to you. Crazy, pulling a string to keep the peace for long enough, trade your old thoughts for new. Crazy.
We went to the doctor every day, and on our third day, I was able to report that there was something wrong with me. The tuk-tuk ride was so hard going that it had given me a backache, so the masseurs were instructed to work on the backache that visits to the doctor had given me. One of the women had a fold-up guitar that she always carried around with her. I had never seen one before, and it seemed a good idea for travelling, although it was a little difficult to play. One night, she invited us all to her room to have a sing-along. It would have been much better in the garden, but that was off-limits at night because of the mosquitoes. There was a nice atmosphere in the room, but I never liked sing-alongs, so after listening to a few songs, I sang 3 of my own and then went to our bedroom to read while Federika stayed and enjoyed herself. One afternoon, we went into Kochi to take a look around. It was a 10-minute ride to the river, where we took a very crowded ferry across to town. There was plenty going on in Kochi, and we started with a traditional Indian dance exhibition. For a little extra, we paid to go in half an hour before the dance to watch the performers being made up, which was an extremely elaborate and skillful procedure. The dancing was weird. It was performed by a man and a woman, with a half-naked man standing behind them, banging away on a tiny cymbal. At one point, the woman danced only with her eyes and appeared to be telling a story, which became self-explanatory when the man held a sword to her throat. I assumed they were having some kind of marital tiff. Maybe he was angry about coming home to find a half-naked man with a cymbal in her bedroom? Next, we went to a display of Kerala-style martial arts. We sat on a balcony and looked down into a large pit where the use of various weapons was displayed. Most of them I was familiar with, but what I had never seen was the 2 long metal flexible bands that spun around in circles. That made a terrible noise, and being deadly sharp, must have been terrifying to be confronted with. They were used in battle and were effective because it was impossible to get anywhere near the user as it moved through the air so quickly, and any contact with bare skin would have been devastating. Of course, they weren't so effective when bullets and cannonballs came along. Finally, Federika went to the Kochi Muziris Biennale, which is a well-known art gallery. I wanted to go as well, but I was troubled by the call of a beer from a nearby bar and felt it would have been rude of me to ignore the call. That night, we had a glorious meal with all the things forbidden at Albin's Glory. I had a delicious fish in vine leaves and a couple of glasses of wine. It was heaven. One night there was a big festival in Kochi, so a few of us went to see it. We arranged with our taxi driver to pick us up from the place where he had left us. I had no idea where we were, so, as a precaution, I took a photo of a hotel we could use as a landmark. The town was heaving and had a great atmosphere. There was a long alleyway with shops on either side that was packed solid with people moving along slowly. It led to a large field where a long row of elephants was standing. They were heavily dressed up in costumes that included large golden headdresses. There were men sitting on them holding umbrellas, although I was not sure why, because there was no sign of rain and it was night time. I had never heard of anyone sheltering from the moon. There were so many people that it was impossible to get close to the elephants, but a man approached us and took us backstage. I felt a bit guilty being given preferential treatment just because we were foreigners, but no one seemed to mind, and we had found that kind of welcome all over India. Being backstage at an elephant show did require proximity to some pretty humongous asses, but that all added to the unique opportunity, and from there we were able to make our way around to the front of the crowd. The men on elephants stood up and started waving large feathers around, while below there was a group of men playing drums and some kind of small trumpets. The elephants were just standing there looking very bored, and they had no more clue as to what it was all about than we did. We walked around the rest of the area and soaked up the atmosphere, which was one of sheer joy. When the time came to meet the taxi driver, we had no idea where the arranged place was. Federika usually had an amazing sense of direction, but I suppose because of the sheer mass of people, she was as lost as I was, and the two women with us were even more clueless. I started showing people the photo of the large hotel I had taken, but surprisingly, no one recognized it. We were half an hour late when the taxi driver suddenly appeared and took us to his taxi a few blocks away. On our first day, we filled in a long questionnaire which, amongst other things, asked about the kind of food we liked and our lifestyle. On our last day, we were given a sheet of paper with our doshas, which had something to do with the 5 elements. Federika was Pitta-Vata, and I was Vata-Pitta. There was a list of foods we should eat and another list of ones we should avoid. I looked up the validity of following a diet determined by one's dosha and found that there was no evidence to suggest that it worked. Considering the world was full of people who smoked despite the overwhelming evidence that it would probably kill them, I found it hard to believe that there were people who would give up food they liked in support of an unresearched theory. I had no doubt that there were plenty of people whose lives were changed for the better because of such a diet, but I was not going to be one of them. Federika was much more open-minded than me and intended to be guided by it, but I was not going to put any money on that happening. It was a good week, but we were happy to be leaving. The surprising thing was that with me eating so little, I was sure I would lose a lot of weight, but that wasn't the case. It was probably because on the days when there was nothing I could eat, I had to fill up on bread. We hired a taxi to take us on the 40-mile drive to Alleppey. As we grew closer to our hotel, civilization faded away until we came to a long road that ran through empty fields that ended at our hotel, Warm Lake Haven. Our accommodation was a little cottage on the edge of a lake. We sat on our balcony with a glass of wine at sunset and let the peacefulness wash over us. It was perfect, except we knew we couldn't stay somewhere so remote. We had booked 4 nights, but the hotel manager was very good in accepting that we would only stay 1 night, and we did give them a very good review. We found another hotel near the beach in Alleppey. We weren't intending to swim there, but it was good walking along the beach to town at night. Alleppey Beach Garden was a nice little hotel owned by a German woman who was friendly in a stereotypical Sergeant Major kind of way. For breakfast, she made sure her manager kept us supplied with endless toast and jam. The manager was a very pleasant young man who was instructed to get us whatever we wanted. It was just as well because there were a lot of mosquitoes, so I got him to drive me around to find an electric mosquito zapper, my weapon of choice. That afternoon, we went around the area, which offered all the boat trips. Normally, we booked these things in advance, but we knew there would be an unlimited choice. It was lovely walking along the waterways where there were hundreds of boats, and I wondered how there could possibly be enough business to go around. We watched workmen sitting on top of one boat repairing the roof with straw. Next day, we went on a boat tour of the waterways of Kerala. My sister had been on a 3-day boat tour the year before and said it was good, but far too long, so she recommended just an overnight stay. We thought hard about it and felt sure that just a day trip would be enough. It was a large boat with 4 staff, and we were the only passengers. What a great feeling it was, pulling away from the riverbank and making our way down the river. We had our choice of a dozen seats on the large deck or lying down and staring at the sky. Lunch was a huge selection of curry dishes cooked on the boat. It was delicious and, as always, far too much. We loved our time on the boat trip, but by mid-afternoon we started to get restless and were very happy that we weren't staying overnight, let alone 3 nights like a lot of people. The next day we booked a boat trip which went along the small waterways. It was a long, narrow boat propelled by a man standing at the back with a long pole. We started off on the main river and then turned into a large system of waterways. At first they were quite big, but the further we went, the smaller the waterways got, and in several places thick weeds had stopped us from going any further. We spent most of the time drifting past people's homes, and although I didn't think they minded, we couldn't help feeling we were imposing and that the people must have felt like they were exhibits on show.
Running from the future, running from the past, standing in the present, trying to make it last. She's always running, but never going anywhere. Never asking questions, never needs to lie. All she ever seems to want is there before her eyes. She's always running, but never seems to care.
It was a 4-hour drive to our next stop, Mardathil Cottages, just outside Varkala. We had a lovely detached room by the beach, and although there was no swimming directly in front of us, it was not far to the swimming area. The sea was very rough, so it was more a case of splashing around in the waves rather than swimming. Every night we took the 20-minute walk to a cliff where all the shops and restaurants were. It was a small path with the sea on one side and the restaurants on the other. We ate there every night, and with both of us loving fish, it was paradise. There were dozens of restaurants, and each one had a large display of fresh fish to choose from. A large fish, including vegetables and French fries, costs around £8 for the 2 of us. They had my favourite fish, grouper, but we were spoilt for choice, and some of the restaurants even threw in a couple of giant prawns for free. There must have been so many fish in their waters, as every night we saw hundreds of lights from the fishing boats in the distance. I don't remember ever eating so well, but drinking was a bit of a performance. In theory, alcohol was forbidden in restaurants all over Kerala. That wasn't for religious reasons, but because they had a problem with alcoholism in the local population. Men were being paid and blowing their wages on alcohol, so their families were left with nothing. It got so bad that the government banned it completely. That had a disastrous effect on tourism, so they changed the law so that alcohol could only be served in hotels. That didn't stop the restaurants that either served bottles of beer that were kept under the table or in large coffee mugs, which, when accompanying a meal, couldn't have been more obvious. If the police came, we were supposed to say we brought the alcohol somewhere else. It was pretty obvious that the police couldn't care less, and in some places they didn't even bother with the pretense. Federika developed quite a bad eye infection, so we took a taxi to the local town and went to an ophthalmologist. There were lots of people waiting, but Federika was waved straight through, which, as always, no one seemed to mind. She was given a thorough examination, a prescription for some antibiotics, and a bill for the grand total of £2.50. Next stop was a week at Paradise Gardens Beach Hotel near Kovalam. This was more expensive than most of the hotels we stayed at, but it looked very special, and it was still around the same price as a modest hotel in Europe. The hotel sent a taxi to pick us up from Varkala, which was just as well because it would have been very hard to find for someone who didn't know the place. We were a few miles from the hotel when our driver called the hotel manager to let him know we were close. The road ended in the middle of nowhere, and 3 young men were waiting for us. They carried our heavy bags along overgrown paths and uneven ground until we arrived at our hotel. When I say hotel, it was actually just two-bedroomed houses, so their maximum occupancy was 8 people. The manager showed us around our 2-story house and explained how it all worked. There was no restaurant, so whenever we wanted food, we rang a little bell which he never failed to answer within minutes. There was a menu, but if we wanted anything else, he would get it for us. We had our own sunbeds and umbrella at the entrance to the deserted beach, but Federika liked to be close to the sea, so every morning they took the sunbeds and umbrella as close to the sea as possible. There was another hotel further along the beach, but that was on top of a cliff, and it had its own swimming pool where most of their guests stayed. Some of their guests did go down the many steps to the beach, which was just as well because there was a lifeguard on duty for their benefit. The sea was very rough, and it was quite difficult getting in and out, so it was reassuring to have the lifeguard there who kept an eye on everyone. Judging by his concern every time someone went into the sea, including us, the waves were not to be messed with. Sometimes I timed my entry badly, and the wave hit me so hard it was like being hit by a truck. Once we were past the breaking waves, the swimming was great, but sadly, there was a lot of plastic floating around, and we couldn't swim more than a few strokes without coming into contact with it. Every morning, the staff went to the beach to clear up what they could, but it was a never-ending task. At lunchtime, I sent a WhatsApp message with our order. When it was ready, they messaged me back, and we walked a few meters to our table at the entrance to the beach. Nothing was cooked from frozen, and everything was bought fresh from the local market. We asked for fish one day, so the manager got up at 6 a.m. to greet his fisherman friend and get us what we had asked for. Federika liked coconut juice with her breakfast, so every morning a coconut with a straw was delivered to our room. One of the boys climbed up a nearby tree to collect them, so we went one day to watch him. The tree was very high, and the boy climbed it with nothing more than his bare feet. The house was strange in that it had no windows, and whilst it was ingrained in me to be concerned about security, I was assured that there was always someone around keeping an eye out. I doubted that, but we felt safe enough, and it was lovely having the gentle breeze coming through the places where windows should have been. There were 5 members of staff for the 2 houses, and the couple that were using the other house left halfway through the week, so we had the whole place to ourselves. There was even a nice little story about how it all started. A German man was walking along the beach below and got talking to a 17-year-old Indian boy. They became good friends and decided to go into partnership together. The German bought the land just above the beach where they had met, and the Indian boy helped him build the 2 houses and manage the property. One afternoon, we were sitting on the beach when a lot of crabs appeared on the shoreline. They were about the size of a hand, with light shells and big eyes that looked like they were stuck on poles. There were dozens of them, and we saw one of them was holding onto something while the others were trying to take it from him. I managed to get close enough to see it was a fish they were fighting over. The crab managed to hold on to the fish and eventually got it onto the dry sand, where they all lived in little holes. He was only a few inches away from his hole when a crow came swooping down and stole the fish from him. You see this kind of thing on film, but rarely in real life, and all from the comfort of our sunbeds. There were always dozens of eagles flying around the trees behind us, and they would often glide past only a few meters away, which was quite a sight as they had such colourful feathers on their underside. Sometimes one of them sat by the shoreline for a while, deep in thought. The only excursion available was a day trip to Kanyakumari on the southernmost tip of India, so we booked a taxi to take us. The distance was only 77 kilometres, but it took 3 hours to get there through torturous traffic. The worst place was in a town where a tree had fallen and was blocking the road. We had to pass through 2 different areas, and at the border of each area, we had to stop to pay some kind of tourist tax, even though we were just passing through. On the way, we stopped at the Thanamalayan temple in Suchindram, which made a welcome break. It was worth the visit, and memorable for the long corridors with speckled light coming through the wooden shutters and the Hindu temple, around 2,000 years old, carved in stone. It was magnificent for around 15 minutes. When we finally reached our destination, Kanyakumari, we had hoped to go to the island where the Vivekananda Rock Memorial was, but it was very windy and the sea was very rough. When we saw how much the ferry to the island was being thrown by the waves, we decided against it. There was a tiny beach at the very tip of India where 3 oceans meet: the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, and the Arabian Sea. Like most tourists, we had our photo taken while paddling in the 3 oceans with Vivekananda Rock in the background. Swimming would have been difficult, as apart from the rough sea, there were a lot of rocks around. After lunch, we planned to go to another temple, but we would have had to wait another hour for it to open. By then, we were tired and couldn't face another temple, so after a walk around town, we called our driver and made our way back to our lovely house. For our last night, the manager put our table on the beach, not far from the shoreline, and built an open fire. All we had to do was pay for the firewood. They brought dinner to our table, and we ate as the fire crackled beside us, the only people on the beach.
These are the best of times.
After dinner, we sat next to the fire with a glass of white wine, throwing logs onto the flames when they threatened to go out. We stayed there until there were just a few cinders left glowing in the dark. The perfect end to an amazing week. It was hard to imagine a place so perfect, and we were determined to go back one day, although we knew we never would. So many places to see, and so little time. Our return flight to the UK was from Mumbai, so as we enjoyed the city the last time we were there, we decided to stay a couple of extra days. We booked the same hotel where the receptionist played an amusing game of showing us the room we had booked and then the room we could have if we gave him a big tip. We booked to go on a slum tour of Mumbai, which sounds like a tasteless thing to do, but it was run by a charity where all the proceeds went into slum development, and the guides were young people who grew up in the slums. Our guide was a young girl who was using the tours to finance her studies as a doctor. She was fascinating to talk to, and we were amazed to hear that the caste system was still active in India and that she had a caste certificate which limited her scope as a doctor. Despite everything that had been thrown at her, she was determined to succeed and said it wouldn't have been possible without those slum tours, and most of her colleagues were in the same situation. If they did succeed, they were expected to give back to the community, which I was sure they would do anyway, as you could sense a great loyalty to their roots. Unsurprisingly, conditions in the slum were pretty grim, but what surprised me the most was how enterprising the inhabitants were. There was no benefit system, so people had to find ways of feeding and housing themselves. There was one large area dedicated just to laundry and another area for pottery. One area was used just for collecting and preparing plastic bottles for recycling. Everywhere we looked, there was a mountain of plastic bottles. Being the dry season, everyone was working and living at ground level, but every rainy season it became flooded, so they all had to move upstairs. At the end of the tour, they took us into a room where they showed us the statistics of their work, which claimed to educate 1,500 children a year from the proceeds of the tours. They were selling a few souvenirs and asking for donations, which of course everyone was happy to give. It was a joy to walk around Mumbai as there was something to see on every corner. On one side street, a young girl was walking a tightrope with her mother standing below, holding a baby in one hand and taking donations in the other. At first, the girl walked barefoot, doing the occasional tricks with props that her mother passed to her. The rope was at least 3 meters from the ground, so falling badly could have done a lot of damage. The next time we walked past, there was a child around 8 years old doing the same thing, although nowhere near as skillfully. What struck me was that we have seen similar things on our travels, but the people performing always seemed to be enjoying themselves. In this case, I saw no joy, and it looked like they were doing it purely to make a living, with the mother cracking the whip. Down another street, there was a full-scale cricket match going on while cars went whizzing past. They were using the wooden box for a wicket, and it all looked very serious with wild applause when the batsman hit a 6. The streets were incredibly busy at all times of day, so it could be quite difficult to walk, which was why I was so surprised to see a woman ready to deliver a stack of 500 eggs strapped onto the back of her bicycle. As the sun was setting, we went on a boat ride around a local island. They were selling packets of crisps on the boat that people were buying to feed the seagulls. We held out our hands holding a crisp, and the seagulls swooped down to snatch it. It was much more fun than it sounds. As we pulled back into port, we were treated to the majestic sight of the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel. The next night, they were holding the Gala Goda Arts Festival in a park in the centre. There was a large stage with excellent acts performing from early evening until late at night. There were some well-known singers, some classical dancers, and a variety of other acts. Around the park, people were doing their own things. There was a fancy convertible car parked on the grass with 6 young kids sitting in the back performing a rap song and loving every second of it. It was such a great night. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to India, Rishikesh, Jodhpur, Jaisalmer, Mandrem, Panjim and Agonda.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.